Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you are. We are very excited to see so many people here today. This is the Brown Bag Lunch series of a number of organizations who Vicki is going to introduce in a moment. But at the meantime, I want to go out of order for a moment. I want to thank my colleagues on the who are the co-sponsors. We usually don't do more than one of these a month. And we had a fabulous conversation with the General Counsel of Planned Parenthood recently. But given the victory in this case, they allowed me to encourage and ask for this to happen. So I want to say thank you. Vicki, you want to start?
Thank you. Yeah, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is part of the virtual Brown Bag Lunch series for the Lawyers Brown Bag Lunch series. And it is brought to you as a partnership with the American Jewish Committee. I'm going to get the name of your organization wrong, Rhonda, as I'm looking at the acronym, and I hope I get it right. It's the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. Oh, I got it right. Thank you. As well as the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, Tzedek, DC, and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. Thank you for joining us. And if you are interested in seeing other installments of the series, they are on the JCRC of Greater Washington's YouTube channel, or feel free to shoot me an email and I will send you a link to that. So Rhonda, why don't you go ahead and get us started on this important conversation.
My pleasure. And again, thank you. All right. As we all know, this has been an interesting month in terms of legal cases. And that was why we were so excited about the victory that you're going to be hearing about today. So without further ado, and with a lot of thanks for the people who came up with the title, Getting the Scoop on Ben & Jerry's BDS, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Okay, first of all, a mechanical thing. I'm asking people to stay on mute, which you should be muted anyway, and go to speaker view. That's usually easier to hear and see. Also, as the moderator, you should be able to reach me if you have questions later. All right, housekeeping out of the way. Alyza D. Lewin is the president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, LDB, and a co-founder and partner at Lewin & Lewin LLP, where she specializes in litigation, mediation, and government relations. She is a member of the AAJLJ's executive board, a past AAJLJ president, and a recipient of our highest honor, the Pursuit of Justice Award. Before establishing Lewin & Lewin, Ms. Lewin worked at Wilmer Cutler Pickering, now Wilmer Hale, and Miller Cassidy LaRocca, and clerked for Justice Menachem Elon, the deputy president of the Israeli Supreme Court. She is a graduate of Princeton University and NYU School of Law. Rachel Lerman is vice chair and general counsel at LDB and a member of its board of directors, member of the California Academy of Appellate Lawyers and the State Appellate Judicial Evaluation Committee of the LA County Bar Association. She previously served as a partner at Barnes & Thornburg LLP, where she co-chaired the firm's National Appellate Practice Group, and at Aiken Gump, and clerked for the late Judge Nelson on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. She is a graduate of Yale University, Syracuse University, and Berkeley School of Law. It is my pleasure to turn this over to Alyza, who will talk a little bit about the history of Ben & Jerry's, a little bit about BDS, and about victory. As I said earlier, I am happy to review questions and will give me the opportunity to ask our panelists. So, Alyza.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you to the AAJLJ for organizing this program. Rachel and I are actually going to kind of tag team back and forth here and cover the topics that Rhonda just mentioned. So maybe we could, yeah, perfect. And I'm going to let Rachel start us off.
Okay, I'm going to take us back in time a little bit, back to the 80s, when Ben & Jerry's was a pretty new company that most of us had never heard of. And Avi Zinger was a young Israeli living in the United States. He happened to try some Ben and Jerry's ice cream and thought, this is good stuff. So he went over to Ben's apartment, and the two had a nice chat about ice cream and the kinds of social justice ideas both of them held. And Avi said, so why don't I sell this stuff in Israel? We don't have really good ice cream there. And Ben said, okay, why not? That's a good idea. Go see my friend Jeff. Talk about putting together a contract. So Avi, he's a young Israeli in his 20s. He figures I better buy a suit, go talk to this guy. And he shows up, and there's Jeff in jeans and a t-shirt, and says, okay, let's put this together. Have your lawyer write a contract, no more than 3 pages, please. So with that, Avi becomes the very first and only ever licensee for Ben & Jerry's. And that means that he not only sells the ice cream, he makes it. So he learns how to make the ice cream. He learned how to use the ingredients. He learns how to do the whole thing. And he opens what Israelis call scoop shops, which means, ice cream parlors. And they are very successful. He has a whole bunch of them throughout Israel. And he does that into the 90s when the Intifada makes him worry for the safety of his employees and his guests, because people are blowing up pizza parlors, and ice cream parlors are probably next. So he closes all the scoop shops, and he starts distributing the ice cream to grocery stores and the Israeli version of 7-Elevens and gas stations. And this is all over Israel, including on the West Bank. It's part of the territory under his contract. And Palestinians and Israelis alike are become very fond of the brand, and it's a big success. And meanwhile, he's continuing with the kinds of social programs that he and Ben are both, and Jerry are both, are all very excited about. I'll let Alyza tell you a little bit about some of those programs, probably too many to list.
Sure. So Avi, as Rachel said, pretty much embodied the Ben & Jerry's social mission. He always, from the get-go, was very involved in using the corporation to support positive causes, including numerous coexistence causes. So one in particular that was very effective was a program called MEET, which is the Middle East Entrepreneurs of Tomorrow. And that's a program that brought together Palestinian and Israeli high school students over the course of 3 summers in a row. They would have the same cohort come back again and again, so that over that extended period of time, the students were able to not only learn the entrepreneurial skills, which the program taught, and all about businesses and what goes into a successful business, but they also were able to really develop strong personal relationships and personal bonds, share their narratives, and come to really understand and appreciate one another. And the program used Ben & Jerry's. I mean, Ben & Jerry's was a highlight, I should say, of the program. The students would come to visit the factory. They used the Ben & Jerry's company as a model. Avi Zinger would not only speak to them, but he was involved in, they had a final program kind of competition. He would help be involved in advising and judging on that program. And he even, on one of the board's trips to Israel, took the board to see a graduation ceremony of the program, where you had Palestinians and Israeli families sitting there in the same room, watching their students graduate after this 3-year program. And sometimes the relationships that were forged were so strong that these students went on even to study, because this program was done in conjunction with MIT University. They sometimes went on together and studied together in college. Very successful program. The program at one point lost some of its funding and was in jeopardy of they didn't know if they'd be able to continue the program. And Avi arranged for Ben & Jerry's to provide a $100,000 donation in order to make sure that this program would be able to continue. And so they were very, very supportive and thankful for what Avi had done and his work there. It's programs like this that, unfortunately, when everything progressed, that Avi was going to end up having to end his support for. And so here you have these kinds of programs that are actually making real progress towards peace, real progress towards coexistence. And yet their support for them was going to be shut down if Avi's business was not going to be allowed to continue. There were other efforts that we talked about and that are in our in the pleadings and the complaint that we had filed in our lawsuit on behalf of Avi, which Rachel will talk about in a minute. But one other one, for example, was Avi thought, why don't we develop an ice cream flavor that uses the products that are grown by Palestinian farmers? And so he actually developed a flavor that would use figs. He called the flavor Fruits of Peace. He went so far as to work with USAID representatives to help identify farmers who could provide these ingredients to him. He worked with designers to develop the packaging for the product. He actually got special permission to go into the Palestinian areas to meet with these farmers, and he was all ready to launch. And then unfortunately, because of the anti-normalization pressures of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, the Palestinian farmers backed away. And that project wasn't able to continue. But that's yet another example of where the BDS movement, when they push and they claim that they're trying to work on behalf of Palestinians, at the end of the day, usually these efforts are harmful to the Palestinians. They're not helpful. In fact, and I guess before we get to the lawsuit, that's what was happening at Ben & Jerry's, right? About a little more than 10 years ago already, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement began targeting Ben & Jerry's and pressuring Ben & Jerry's to stop its sales of ice cream in Israel. And they started initially with letters to the company, and then they started with petitions, and they started targeting the shops in the United States on what they called their free cone day, on the day when you'd have long lines of customers down the block waiting to get their free ice cream cone. At Ben & Jerry's, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS activists would start handing out these very aggressive leaflets, trying to build up public pressure on Ben & Jerry's to end its relationship with its Israeli licensee. And over the years, Ben & Jerry's kept pushing back against this pressure until finally, as I'm sure the people on this call will remember, in May 2021, when there was the conflict in Gaza, online, the very hostile social media post, intense pressure, very critical of Israel, really came to a head. And it was at that point that the pressure on Avi, Zinger, to stop selling and distributing his ice cream across the Green Line came to a head. And Avi explained that he could not stop selling in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, or over the Green Line. He could not do that in part, and in large part, because that would require him to violate Israeli law. Israel has an anti-discrimination law, like we have anti-discrimination policies here in the United States. And their anti-discrimination law includes all the same categories that we're familiar with: race, color, religion, national, ethnic origin, long list, but it also includes residence. In Israel, it is unlawful to discriminate in the provision of services or products on the basis of where people live. And Avi said, I can't do that. I'm distributing now to all of the main supermarket chains, to all the mini market chains, to different food providers throughout Israel, throughout Judea and Samaria, throughout even in Palestinian cities. And I cannot turn around and say, my distribution is going to stop at the Green Line. That would put me in violation of Israel's anti-discrimination law and Israel's anti-boycott law. I can't do that. And so he refused. And the response to his refusal to give in to this pressure was the announcement that I think you may have all been familiar with in July of 2021, when Ben & Jerry's announced that they would not be renewing Avi's license. Now you have to understand that Avi had this relationship at that point with Ben & Jerry's for 34 years, and it had become almost automatic that his license was renewed. His he was, not only did he personify the social justice mission, but the whole way he operated his business was exemplary. There was his maintenance of the quality and the brand were superb. So there was no reason not to renew his license other than his refusal to stop distributing the ice cream across the Green Line. And so they said that when his license was going to expire at the end of 2022, it would not be renewed. Now, one additional point before I pass it back to Rachel that you need to understand is sometimes people were out there saying that, well, this was just going to be a settlement boycott, and that the only place that they wanted to stop his sale was in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, or what in the Ben & Jerry's notice they referred to as the occupied Palestinian territories. But what you have to understand is that that's a little disingenuous, because once they stopped Avi Zinger's license, that meant that Avi Zinger would not be permitted to manufacture or distribute ice cream anywhere in all of Israel. So what that meant is that come January 1, 2023, there would have been no Ben & Jerry's anywhere in Israel, not just in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, but everywhere in Israel. So it would have amounted to a full boycott of all of Israel. And that was, quite frankly, would have made the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement activists very happy, because they would have liked nothing more than a full boycott of all of Israel. So with this as the background, we then ended up connecting with Avi Zinger and offering to assist him and represent him in a lawsuit on his behalf in order to try and stop the basically the refusal to renew his license, which would have shut down his business. Rachel, why don't you take it from there and talk a little bit about our law?
So I should add that it was important to Avi as well as to the Brandeis Center and other members of our team, which included Lewin and Lewin. That's Alyza and her dad have a law firm, and her dad was the one who actually came up with the initial theory for the lawsuit. We were all interested in stopping what BDS was doing, and not just, it wasn't just about the money for Avi. He was really angry with the BDS movement. So we teamed up with the Brandeis Center, Nathan Lewin, Mark Zell in Israel, and we also have New Jersey Council, since we decided to bring suit in New Jersey for jurisdictional reasons. So Nathan Lewin's theory, which was brilliant and simple and elegant, you can't terminate a contract on the grounds that someone has refused to do something illegal. And that's just basic US contract law. You can't tell your licensee or your franchisee, hey, unless you engage in this price fixing scheme with us, you're out of here. So even if you have the right to terminate a contract, you can't do it on the basis of refusal to comply with an illegal request. You can't say, okay, well, we'll renew your license, but you got to go shoot your neighbor. You can't do that. And as Alyza's already pointed out, there were laws that Avi would have been forced to violate had he complied with their request. Israel Anti-Boycott Law, Israeli Anti-Discrimination Law. Also, the contract called for him to comply with US EAR, which is our export laws, which include anti-boycott laws. You can't boycott Israel under US export laws. It also, as it happens, you can't boycott Israel under a lot of state laws. So we brought this lawsuit, and other people also brought lawsuits. There were shareholder lawsuits. The state AGs worked on divesting their pension plans from Unilever. So the pressure was already building. And we filed a preliminary injunction motion in the district court, the federal district court in New Jersey. And we laid out, our theories, and we asked the federal court to just enjoin the termination of the contract. That's that's the kind of thing people are entitled to ask district courts to do. Like, okay, there's this big disagreement between the parties, but you maintain the status quo until there's time to litigate or arbitrate all of the issues. And that can take a couple of years. So in the meantime, nothing changes. Maintain the status quo, keep the contract going. A few days after we filed the preliminary injunction motion, Unilever reached out to Avi to talk about settlement. And one thing I didn't mention is another legal aspect of this was the Antitrust Laws. Israel had a consent decree. Unilever is a very big company, as you know, and it owns an awful lot of ice cream companies, including Strauss, which was the main player in the Israeli ice cream market. So when Unilever purchased Ben & Jerry's around 2001, they had to sign a consent decree with the Israeli antitrust authorities, basically saying that they would not interfere with Avi's business. And of course, that's exactly what they were doing. So this was another legal aspect of the case that we brought to the fore. And as I said, so we filed our preliminary injunction motion, and the next thing we know, there are settlement discussions. And since Alyza handled those, I will let her address them. You're mute.
Yes, sorry. We we just had trucks going by here, which is why I put myself on mute. The case, as Rachel said, was proceeding, and then there was at the same time discussions going on. The point of the discussions and really of the resolution, and to understand, is that Avi recognized, as Rachel said, that this was no longer just a business dispute that he might be having. This had really become an issue that was an issue of concern to the larger, broader Jewish community. And that's why you saw all the different organizations that got involved get involved. That's why you saw that it actually even extended, as Rachel was saying, beyond just the Jewish community. You had the different states attorneys general, you had the different groups that were all getting involved. You had the Israel Competition Authority that was looking into it. You had members of the Israeli Knesset that were looking into it. It was clearly an issue that went way beyond just Avi Zinger. And that, I think, was very much on Avi's mind as he was looking to resolve this. He realized that he would have to be able to resolve this in a way that that addressed the boycott, divestment, and sanction issues pressure, because that's what got him into this situation to begin with, was that pressure. And so the reason the resolution was such a success and was appreciated by so many around the world was because it did just that. Where the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement had touted this situation when the announcement was made in July of 2021 as a great success, because they realized that what it meant is that come the beginning of 2023, there'd be no more Ben & Jerry's ice cream in Israel. What the resolution that Avi negotiated with Unilever did is it ensured that no, Ben & Jerry's ice cream is here in Israel to stay, and that the manufacturer and distributor of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, who has been manufacturing and distributing this ice cream in Israel for the last almost 35 years, will continue to do that and continue to make that same product, that same wonderful Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And now it's his business, and he'll be able to continue doing that. And the Ben & Jerry's and the Unilever sold him the Hebrew and the Arabic trademarks so that he could continue to sell that Ben & Jerry's ice cream using those trademarks. And Unilever absolutely did the right thing here. They are to be commended because what they did is they ensured that not only would everyone, no matter what their background, no matter where they reside, would be able to continue getting that ice cream, but they ensured that Avi's diverse workforce, which includes immigrants and refugees and individuals who would have a very difficult time also trying to find new employment if his business shut down. It ensured their job security. It also ensured the continued economic support that all of those thousands of Palestinians and Israelis who rely on Avi's business because they are involved in the whole chain of providing for his suppliers and his distributors, that they all still will not lose that economic resource and that support. And that perhaps most significantly, the coexistence projects that Avi gets involved in and supports also would be able to continue and flourish and continue getting that kind of support from Avi. So the decision that Unilever made was the right one. And that's where we are now today as a result of the settlement that Avi negotiated with Unilever. I think, Rhonda, if there are questions, we're happy to take some questions.
We'll do so. We've been getting some. I did want to make one comment before we go to the questions, and it's somewhat of a personal one. There are a lot of organizations that have been involved with this issue, and when there was success, a lot of them sent out information. But I think it's really important to acknowledge and recognize what you did and the amount of work that is involved in every stage of litigation, and the writing, the rewriting, the revising, and everything. You did great, and I want to acknowledge and thank you for that. I also see that Nat Lewin is on the call. I won't embarrass you, but I want to thank you for being here too. So let's start with some early questions we received. And one of them is, what if I don't like the policy of a certain country? I just don't like it. How should I express that? I'm not going to boycott. How should I express that? What is okay? Because really where I'm going is, this is somewhat of a free speech issue. Let me rephrase it. The kind of criticism that comes up is that you're stopping me from exercising my right to free speech. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That's a kind of a complex issue. If you're an individual, you're welcome not to buy products.
Okay.
If you are if you were talking about the anti-boycott laws that most states have adopted, boycott isn't just about speech. We've seen in recent cases, I'm thinking about the Supreme Court's Rumsfeld case, which involved whether military personnel could come to campus when the campus was distressed by the military's policies with respect to gay members of the military. And that was, the campus said, well, this is a speech issue. And the court decided, no, it's more than speech. This affects conduct, and you can't prevent the military from coming to the campus to do recruiting. So go ahead, Alyza.
Go ahead and say the Eighth Circuit just had a recent en banc decision similarly, where they talked about the distinction between speech and the conduct. And the boycott itself is not speech. That is actual economic, conduct. And so you can say whatever you want in terms of expressing your opinion about the policies of a foreign government. You can personally, as Rachel was saying, decide you don't want to buy those products. What these laws in the different states are saying is that they view, certainly in this case, that as discriminating on the basis of national origin. And they don't have to support discriminatory conduct. And so if you want a government contract, just like the government can say, we're not going to support people who are going to discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, gender. We are not going to discriminate on the basis of national origin either. And so if you are going to engage in that kind of discrimination, you're free to do that in this country, but not on our dime. And so what those laws are saying is the government's not going to fund that kind of discrimination. That's all.
And Israel has similar anti-boycott and anti-discrimination laws. They don't want you, refusing to sell to people on the basis of where they live, whether it's Judea and Samaria or, the rest of Israel. We could spend hours talking about Claiborne hardware and other Supreme Court cases, but I don't think we have time here and now.
Well, I think you gave a very good summary, because one of the things that I found as I've been doing some research is people say free speech, but not necessarily knowing exactly what the First Amendment and the First Amendment series of cases provide. So that's very helpful. I have a couple of interesting questions on top of many other interesting questions that have come in. So I'm just going to go in direct order. Would you say that as committed Zionists, someone should boycott Unilever, or do you have the opposite response regarding this country? How do you feel about people using
I
their
think, as
products?
I said, that Unilever now should be commended. I can understand, and I've heard from some people who have said, well, that they would prefer to show their appreciation for Unilever by purchasing one of their other brands of ice cream, like Talenti, instead of, in the United States, purchasing Ben & Jerry's. In Israel, you should absolutely purchase Ben & Jerry's. You should purchase in Israel as much Ben & Jerry's as you possibly can, because Avi Zinger is a hero and he should be supported. In the United States, I understand, in light of the lawsuit that the Ben & Jerry's board brought against Unilever because they were critical of what Unilever did, why some people would say, well, I'm conflicted. So show your support for Unilever by at least purchasing another Unilever brand.
We in this household are back to using Dove soap.
So actually, you brought up a very good point, which dovetails with one of the questions. What is the status of the settlement that you have? Has it been attacked? Is it a word I hate to use, bulletproof?
The deal with Avi is a done deal. It's closed, it's finished, it's moving forward. Avi's moving forward. Unilever and the board clearly have some internal matters they have to resolve, but Avi's deal is intact and he's moving forward.
Great, and congratulations again. This is real curiosity. Have Ben and Jerry's, the individuals, expressed their feelings about this? I don't really focus on Twitter, so I don't know.
Not to me.
Okay,
Not to my knowledge.
good. Has the board tried to void the settlement, or you're saying no, that is a done deal because it's with Unilever?
The board filed a lawsuit.
Right.
Avi Zinger is not part of that lawsuit.
Great.
And that lawsuit is now pending.
Okay.
So.
Have there been other economic or political ramifications for Ben & Jerry's in the US that you're aware of regarding this? Or has this settlement brought everything together?
Well, as Alyza said, people are somewhat conflicted about whether to purchase Ben & Jerry's ice cream in the US, and how that will play out, remains to be seen.
Okay. All right. There was a question about how Palestinians benefit, but you made that very clear earlier in terms of the workforce, not only of Avi's company, but of the supplier companies, and all around they are the workers in all levels of that manufacturing. So I'd love to hear more about that.
I can add some more to that. I mean, there's the primary customers in the Judea and Samaria, in that area, are the Palestinians. So when you talk, for instance, about the supermarket chains like Rami Levy that are operating there on the seam, the majority, in fact, of their customers and even their workforce are Palestinians, because the selection and the pricing that they can get in those supermarkets are much better than what's available in the Palestinian cities. So they love shopping in these supermarkets. And what would happen if Avi had been forced or had succumbed to the BDS pressure and stopped, the group that would be most harmed by this would be the Palestinians, because they would then not be able to get their ice cream. And in fact, the Bassem Eid, who is a Palestinian activist, he filed his own human rights complaint with the Human Rights Commission in New York, saying, I'm going to be deprived of my Ben & Jerry's ice cream if this goes through. And that was right. I mean, that was the terrible irony of the situation, is that it's not only, as I say, the workforce and the chain of suppliers and distributors and the coexistence projects, but it is also just the customers. The customers that would be harmed would be primarily the Palestinians.
Right. So the BDS activists in the United States and elsewhere are not actually helping the Palestinians. They are getting in the way of not only, the ability to purchase the ice cream, but the all the coexistence type of work that Avi has. And Alyza mentioned two things, and there were many, many, many different programs that Avi has been involved in, because he passionately believes in, the kind of social justice that the ideas that he thought he shared with Ben and Jerry.
Okay. Let's see some other things coming on, some of whom have already been answered. Just from what sort of legal arguments did Ben and Jerry's make in the lawsuits?
In the lawsuit with us?
Uh-huh.
Well, it was actually interesting. They did not deny that the only reason that they wanted to stop working with Avi was his refusal to stop selling in the West Bank. They didn't say that he had ever done. In fact, they had praised him to the skies for years, so it would be difficult for them to say he had done anything amiss. But they didn't waste any ink on that. Their main argument was they could, the contract says we can terminate, so we can terminate. And they didn't address our arguments that under US law, you can't terminate for an unlawful reason. You can't terminate someone because they won't go along with an unlawful demand or discriminate. You can't terminate someone because you tell them, okay, you can't hire any disabled people. You can't terminate if they say no.
Right. That's the basic general legal principle, is that you can't condition a contract. You can't include as a condition to a contract that one party has to do something unlawful. And that's basically
continuation of a contract. Right.
That was our theory, is that was this continuation of this contract was being conditioned on Avi agreeing to do something illegal. And he couldn't do that. He couldn't do that.
And they didn't respond to those arguments at all.
So if I understand it correctly, it was mainly out of contract law. You did not get into the other issues as much, or did I miss that?
Well, it was contract. That was our primary argument,
Right.
But the contract itself said you can't violate United States export laws. So there were various kind of legal angles to this. There was also the antitrust angle. So we did raise that in our lawsuit too.
Okay.
The complaint that we filed and all the pleadings are actually available on the Brandeis Center website under our resources tab, where there's actually on the home page a case highlights. And so it's possible to just go there, and if people are interested and want to read the papers, you can read them.
They're public. They're public.
They're public, right? Exactly. They're public. And people who have Pacer can go to Pacer and pull it up too. But if you want to just go to the BrandisCenter.com website, you can can find it there too.
And you can find Avi's op-ed and other interesting, Bassam, the Palestinian activist whose name I'm going to mispronounce if I say it, his op-ed is available too.
Okay. Going back to legal theories, can you talk a little bit, was there an antitrust angle to this?
Well, yes, there is an antitrust angle. I briefly addressed it because when Unilever merged with Ben & Jerry's, the problem in Israel was there would be, sort of an ice cream monopoly, since Unilever's Strauss ice cream was the primary player on the ice cream scene. And that's why the parties, Ben & Jerry's and Unilever, entered into the consent decree with the Israeli antitrust authorities that required them to maintain some distance from Avi's business. And the Israeli antitrust authorities were involved in behind the scenes in this case, because the consent decree was being violated.
There's an English translation at that spot on our website too. There was an English translation of the consent decree and also of the Israeli laws, the Anti-Discrimination Law and the Anti-Boycott Law are all also on the website at that.
In English.
In English, yeah, the English translations, because they were all attached to our pleadings.
That's usually helpful. Going a little off topic for a moment, can you talk about other work that you do in this space? And here's my second part of the question. You talked earlier about how, you really see this as an important victory, not only for people who support Israel, but very importantly for the Palestinians who live in the area. And hopefully this is on the way to help breaking the back of some of the BDS work, or maybe I'm being a little more hopeful, but I'd love to hear more about what you do regarding this issue.
Well, one of the things that we do is and what the Brandeis Center, I think, has a reputation for having supported and assisted students on university campuses who experience harassment and discrimination on their campus. And one of the things that we have seen in recent years is that not only do students experience the traditional anti-Semitism, the traditional anti-Semitic tropes that suggest, right, that Jews are all powerful or greedy or controlling. They don't only experience the anti-Semitism from the right, the swastikas and the white supremacists. That's all still, unfortunately, on campus. But there is a growing anti-Semitism that's been very challenging for many administrators and the public to see and understand. And that's an anti-Semitism that a recent case that the Brandeis Center has been involved in, that's just been in the news, involving a former student from USC, from University of Southern California, Rose Rich, who was pressured and essentially pushed out of her position as the elected vice president of student government purely on the grounds that she's a Zionist. And the idea that as a Zionist, that must mean you're a racist. And so if you're a Zionist, you must be unfit. In that case, the argument was unfit to serve as vice president. But we've seen now that increasingly on college campuses, the pressure is you must be unfit to participate in any of our racial or social justice movement efforts. And oftentimes those activities involve calls to support boycott, divestment, and sanctions resolutions on university campuses. Oftentimes what you see is that the BDS movement is using this support or belief that Israel has a right to exist as a litmus test on their campus. And so students, including Jewish students who care passionately about these issues, who want to and believe in causes involving, they want to fight for women's rights and LGBT rights and immigration rights, and they're concerned about climate change, they're being told that the first thing that they have to do is disavow their belief in the right of Jewish self-determination in our ancestral homeland, that they have to somehow disavow their connection to Israel, their belief in Israel as the Jewish homeland. And that if they don't, then they are shunned and treated as pariahs. And so to that extent, trying to help students navigate those waters and recognize their rights, and teach administrators too, that they have a legal obligation to protect the students from that kind of marginalization and harassment and exclusion and discrimination is a key part of what we do. And so to the extent that we are able to help push back in a broader sense against these efforts also of the boycott, sanction, divestment and sanctions movement is also then, that fits into.
And let me just
our efforts.
add that we've been primarily working on university campuses. We're also moving into the corporate arena to try to do training and involving corporations and government entities, because you see this creeping into DEI, which is supposed to be about inclusion, but unfortunately often ends up in exclusion of Jews and Zionist Jews. So we're trying to move into that area. We've been asked to move into that area too, and we are doing that.
Obviously, that is a new area for you, but the issues, tend to remain the same. We got a hypothetical question. Given the fact that Avi would still be retaining the license from Unilever to manufacture products, not that this would ever happen, but let's say there was a decline in quality. That would still be Unilever would say, hey, wait a second. And I got an interesting question from contract law. So let's say someone did, so you know what? Chunky monkey here is not the same chunky monkey at home. Would that be a question for Unilever or Avi, or how would that work?
So
It's going
Avi,
to be the same.
Avi has been, it's going to be the same. Avi has been, when he's been making his ice cream, he's been using from the same sources, the same ingredients as Ben and
Fair
Jerry.
trade, the fair
Right.
trade
And in
ingredient.
fact, right, Avi is the only fair trade certified product in all of Israel. He's going to continue using the same sourcing and ingredients. So, and his intent, right, is to maintain his brand and the brand the same way it has always been, because it is the same Ben & Jerry's ice cream and continue to be the same Ben & Jerry's ice cream.
Great. Do you have any comments, thoughts that you can share regarding the Ben & Jerry's board and their animus regarding this issue that you can say? I understand if not. Okay, I mean, lots of other questions. So.
Okay, yeah, that's
Okay, because I see that they've been, someone asked whether Ben and Jerry's have commented, but I know that there have been occasional comments from the board regarding this. So you're not expecting, or is that a naive question, that there will be other lawsuits challenging the settlement? You are not aware of any at this point? Is there a time frame to do it, or it could happen? Okay, so that definitely was one of the questions that we had. What are your thoughts? You don't have to answer regarding companies that are doing business in Russia, Western Russia, and people are thinking about boycotting. Have you been contacted regarding that issue, or have you mainly been focusing, as will be the conversation today, regarding BDS and Israel?
our focus is on BDS in Israel.
Okay, so you've not been getting a lot of that. Okay, that's good. I think I have answered most of the questions from the JCRC. Let me go back and see if there are any individual ones that I did not get to. I've gotten to most of them. Do you know about the status of what I understand was a resolution against Israel in North Carolina? Do you know anything about that status, and see how that affects, or any of the how many states now have anti-BDS resolutions or laws? Do you know that offhand?
I think it's
Over 25, right?
Between 20 and 30.
Yes.
Okay, right. Okay, so that's good. All right. We have a few more minutes and I would love to, okay, I see another question. What is the status, if you know, of the Bronner action against the American Studies Association? And are there other similar faculty actions floating around?
So I think, and that matter now is really being handled by the Deborah Project, but I believe that that matter is now in the DC courts. It was moved from the federal courts.
Okay.
And it may be pending in the DC Superior Court at the moment. I'm actually not 100% sure what the current status is. I know that it's been bouncing around on procedural issues. It has not totally gotten to the merits yet, as far as I know.
Okay, terrific. I think I answered the questions that had come in. Can I give each of you a minute to talk about, first of all, feel free to brag again, but also give me, oh wait, I did get a question. The press, without identifying who, is reporting that Ben & Jerry's US employees are being required to enroll in a program that educates them about the Middle East conflict. Do you know anything about that? And is that something that you might get involved in your spare time?
I had seen a report some time ago about that. And I think that where it came from is that last year, soon after this announcement in July of 2021, there were a series of, I think they were webinars that were put together by the Ben & Jerry's in Vermont with different speakers to try and, my understanding was maybe to try and make available to their franchisees, people within their company, maybe background or information about this. And I think that what happened is that those recordings were now being, they had been archived or library, there was a library, and were being made available to, the current chain of whether it's franchisees or employees. It's not clear from the report who it was who was, watching these. There was a statement that came out from Ben & Jerry's or from Unilever, I don't recall which, saying that just denying that, or denying that there was any kind of mandatory required, right, that was required training.
Okay.
So, but my assumption is that those are the videos that were circulating, and I don't know what individual franchise owners were asking their employees to watch or not watch, or offering for them to watch or not watch. But I think that those are what was called the training videos, were videos that were made in the wake of the announcement last summer.
All right. Okay. So would you like to spend a minute in, again, enjoying the victory, but telling us, where you think you're going next with this? You've talked a little bit about it, and just to wrap up for us.
I would, it's a very exciting time, as Rachel knows, to be now at the Brandeis Center. We are growing, and we're seeing that our work, and one of the reasons why we are growing is that our work is really making a difference, that people are beginning to recognize and understand what up until now I think was almost invisible. It was a form of harassment and discrimination that many people didn't see and didn't understand. And I think that each of these cases, whether it's the Ben & Jerry's case, whether it's Rose Rich's case, whether it's other matters that we've been handling, have all helped raise awareness and understanding that both, right, that as Jews, we share not only a common faith, we share this sense of Jewish peoplehood, and our history and our ancestry is completely intertwined with the land of Israel. And so when we as the Jewish people are under attack, or when the Jewish homeland is under attack, whether they're efforts to delegitimize Israel's right to exist. Those are all part and parcel of the same package. And what the Brandeis Center is doing now is really pushing back, and I think pushing back using the law, which is a very, very powerful tool, as everybody on this call knows, using the law to defend the Jewish people and protect our people from these efforts to demonize, to marginalize, to ostracize, to discriminate, because everybody wants a better world. Everybody wants a world which is truly safe and welcoming and inclusive. And that world has to be a world that also includes Jews.
Great. Rachel?
Yes, well, address 2 points quickly. One, you raised the free speech issue, and I think there is so much misunderstanding about the First Amendment and how free speech works on campus and elsewhere. And one of the things that we frequently educate people on, university administrators say, well, we can't do anything about it because it's free speech. Well, when speech crosses into conduct, absolutely, they can and must do something about it, because they're required under civil rights law not to allow a hostile environment to fester on campus. But they can also use their own speech. People seem to forget that just because someone is saying something you don't like doesn't mean you have to be quiet about it. You can speak out. You can say, okay, you know, BDS movement has taken these positions, SJP on campus has taken these positions, and the university doesn't support it. We don't support discrimination or exclusion of any of our students, including our Jewish and Zionist students. I know that a lot of parents are very concerned, and they're sending their kids off to these campuses. I'm happy to say that mine have already been through college, but if I would be very concerned now too. And it's hard. A lot of students just want to be quiet about their Judaism and their Zionism. And one way that we help, we have what we call our Jigsaw Fellows, which are law students on campuses who are trained to help undergraduates. Not just with legal problems, but sometimes you just need moral support. So we at the Brandeis Center do offer a lot of moral support, even when we can't give them a legal remedy. And the Jigsaw students are available to do that too. So hopefully, students will feel comfortable, if not reaching out to us, older lawyers, than to reaching out to younger law students on campus who understand these issues. And it can also offer them, some responses. We have a lot of fact sheets, and I think a lot of times you're faced with these questions about international law or about Zionism, and it helps to be able to have the responses at the ready. And hopefully our fact sheets will arm students and give them some confidence to speak out and respond, which it's hard to do. I know that, but it's easier to do when you have the answers at your disposal.
Thank you very much, and especially for agreeing to speak to us in the midst of, I'm sure, is a very busy season as a result of this. Congratulations again on your win. Thank you to the people who showed up today and asked the questions. I hope you got the chance to not only hear from amazing people, but to learn something about this very important issue. And you will be hearing from us, the various groups, the JCRC, AAJLJ, AJC, Ariel's group, because we want to continue these conversations. It's really important that we reflect what people are interested in. So unless there is anything else, the bell is about to be rung. I want to thank you all. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event.